everybody. Happy Earth Day again. Thanks so much for joining us today for the kickoff of the Community Climate Action Plan on Earth Day. We're so happy to have all of you. So we're going to get started here now. Just a reminder, we're going to have a panel discussion later. So if you'd like to start thinking of any questions you have, you can put those in the Q&A box and address it to all panelists. So I'm going to give a little introduction and then we'll hand it over to our city manager here in just a minute. So thanks again for coming and happy Earth Day. I'm Megan Anderson. I head up sustainability for the city, and we're going to be joined by several city staff and the city manager today to help us kick off this event. We're going to spend a little time reviewing the highlights of the plan, but for the bulk of the time, we're going to dig into the action areas for all of us to talk about how we could take action on climate work. So today we wanted to hear from city leadership on why climate work is important and how the city is leading by example and what all of you can do to take action to get us where we need to go. First, I just wanted to take a quick minute to say a big thank you to so many people across Raleigh who contributed to this project. We couldn't have done it without the contributions of City Council for all their leadership on climate action, to all the city departments for all the great amount of work they do to support climate action in Raleigh, and for the many community members and Ccap stakeholders that contributed to the development of this climate plan. Also, a quick shout out to my team in the Office of Sustainability. We're a small but mighty team of 4, and it's definitely been an all hands on deck effort. And we couldn't have gotten this far without all the community support, and we're looking forward to continuing all this great collaboration now that we're rolling out the plan. So thank you again to all of you for being here today to help us celebrate the kickoff of the Ccap and to start implementation. So here's the agenda for today. In just a moment, I'm going to turn it over to Marcel Adams-David, our city manager, to kick it off. Then I'll provide a brief overview of what's in the Ccap as information. And Ccap, just for reference, is short for what we call the Community Climate Action Plan. You'll probably hear a lot of us saying that today. We've been saying it for a long time. Then we'll spend the rest of our time with our panelists, which are city leadership that work on Raleigh's transportation, planning, development, buildings, fleet, and stormwater. And they'll provide a short overview of their work. And then please remember, we'll be opening up to questions and answers. So please go ahead and start putting any questions you have in the box as you think of them. So with that, I'd like to introduce our city manager, Marcel Adams-David. I'm going to share a quick bio and then we'll let her talk. So Marcel Adams-David is our Raleigh city manager. She's the first female and first African-American to serve in that capacity in North Carolina's capital city. A true public servant, Marcel has committed to her life to public service for the past 27 years. She's a native of Richmond County, a 1998 graduate of Richmond Senior High School. Marcel attended college at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, which she loves to tell people, for her undergraduate and graduate studies. She began her local government career in 1993 with the city of Hamlet, where she served for 20.5 years, and the last 13 as the city manager. Marcel became the assistant city manager for the city of Raleigh in 2014 before assuming the role of city manager at the end of 2020. And I just want to say, when I recently met with Marcel to update her on what our office was working on, she shared with me some really beautiful thoughts about why she decided to take this job and at this crucial time. And I told Marcel that she basically described the definition of equity and intergenerational equity and sustainability as she talked about her experience and how that was important for her to take care of our world and people. And how we leave something good and even better for future generations. So Marcel really gets this stuff and truly works to make Raleigh a better place and a wonderful place. And she's also long been our executive champion for our equity work in the city. So thank you, Marcel, for leading us with your heart and being a great champion for our sustainability and our climate, resiliency, and equity work. With that, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Megan. It is absolutely an honor and a privilege to share with you guys on today, Earth Day. And so as I am excited to talk a little bit about the importance of the work that we do every single day to make this community a wonderful place to live, work, play, and learn, I'm going to share a little bit about some of those things that we do. I am personally driven to ensure that I, as an individual, and we as a city do our part to address climate change, equity, and environmental stewardship so that we might preserve and protect our world for future generations. To me, that is the core of climate change work and the true foundation of sustainability. The things that we do today will impact the quality of life for our children and the generations to come. As we all know, the pandemic of 2020 took a toll on the Raleigh community. It separated us from friends and families, it shuttered businesses, and it took us out of our civic life. But as we entered 2021, we are now seeing a light at the end of this very long tunnel. Our community will come through it because we are Raleigh, and we are resilient even in the face of adversity. During this time, the City of Raleigh and our community partners have been hard at work on a plan for the future of our city. Because for all that coronavirus took away, it had given us a chance to pause and think about the kind of future we want to build together. And in that future, we see a healthy, vibrant city for all of our residents, a strong economy that lifts everyone, and a community that is stronger and more resilient than ever before. So as we look to the future and all of the challenges that the past has put before us, we also need to recognize that we have an opportunity to build the future that sets us apart from everywhere else. An additional challenge that we are facing is climate change. Climate change creates many problems for our city. It causes health problems from poor air quality. It damages infrastructure with increased floods and more frequent weather events. And it's extremely costly for businesses and individuals. But like coronavirus, climate change also gives us an opportunity to consider what kind of future we want for our city and for ourselves. Taking action now to address climate change will allow us to connect people to economic opportunities through city planning and expanded transportation options, encourage healthy, walkable spaces that bring vibrant character to our city spaces, and it prepares now for future disasters so that our communities are stronger and we can recover faster when emergencies strike. This is all incredibly exciting for us at the City of Raleigh. We are looking forward to working with you in the community to build the future that we want together, because it will take all of us working together to make this happen. The Ccap, or the Community Climate Action Plan, does just this. It centers our community. Over 150 people representing businesses, nonprofits, and religious organizations, as well as state and county agencies, brought their priorities, their perspectives, and their expertise into the document that will be discussed today. We thank each of them for their time and their thoughtful contributions. The strategies included in the plan give a pathway forward, not just for the City of Raleigh as an organization, but for the community of Raleigh as a whole. The plan identifies actions and strategies for you to put into practice to contribute to our brighter future. Now that we have taken the opportunity to think about how we want to move forward as a community, it is time to do the work. We need everyone to participate, to learn together, and to commit to our shared vision of Raleigh's future. It will take resilience and a level of stick-to-itiveness, but we can and will persevere. How do I know? We always have, and we always will. So thank you for joining us here today and taking these first critical steps to make our future as bright as it can possibly be. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marcel. You always give us such inspiring words that set me up really well. Now I'm going to move into sharing with everybody a little bit of background and overview on what's in the plan. So bear with me for just a second, and I'm going to share my screen again. All right. So Thanks again, Marcel. As we all know, climate change is a global issue, and we're seeing the effects of this all around the world. We're also seeing the effects right here locally in Raleigh. And as Marcel mentioned, climate change will create a lot of challenges for our city, but it also gives us a chance to think about a healthier, more prosperous, and greener future for everyone in Raleigh. Today, we'll talk about Raleigh's plan for climate action, which addresses our greenhouse gas emissions, but also looks at ways to move toward a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable future. So why should we care about climate action, and what happens if we don't act? Ccap includes strategies and actions that will build our community's resilience to climate change. Climate change already has and will continue to have a lot of impacts on our region and our community. These include more extreme temperatures with longer and hotter days and less cooling off at night, longer and colder days with more extreme temperature variability, more and stronger hurricanes and storms, more flooding and more dangerous flooding that affects our infrastructure and roadways. And even though we think a lot of rain in Raleigh, we're also facing longer and more severe droughts. We're also growing so fast in Raleigh in this region, and we need to keep in mind that as the city continues to develop, more roadways and buildings mean more impervious surfaces, more water runoff, and more flooding. It also means more strain on our resources and infrastructure and more challenges for people in our community to access resources. So, how are we going to tackle climate change in Raleigh? In May 2019, City Council set the goal of an 80% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by the year 2050. This is an ambitious goal, meaning it will be a challenge to meet. It's going to take a lot of new technology, new infrastructure, and most importantly, it'll take all of us in the community working together. So the Ccap lays out a plan for us to work together to get there. So here's a quick visual on what our greenhouse gas emissions look like. For every year across the city, we emit over 6 million metric tons of greenhouse gas into the atmosphere. That's just in Raleigh alone. To visualize this, think of a two-story house. 1 metric ton of CO2 would take up about as much space as this house. Now imagine 6 million houses worth of these gases every year emitted into the atmosphere. This is the challenge we have before us. So how do we change that? So our greenhouse gas emissions are growing every year. Raleigh is a growing city, and as the population rises, we are using more energy, we have more cars on the road, and we're generating more waste. This graph represents the emissions forecast for our community if we do nothing. It's our business as usual model from now through 2050. The blue is our buildings and energy, the yellows are transportation emissions, and that small green line at the bottom is our waste emissions. The dashed line represents the 80% reduction by 2050 goal. This shows that we have a lot of work to do, but luckily with all of our stakeholders, we've come up with climate actions that can help us deeply cut our emissions. The Ccap plan lays out a path forward, and it helps us set a course to reach this goal, bringing together the programs that the city has with the resources and expertise in our business community and our neighborhoods. It addresses the major sources of emissions while preparing us for the future impacts of climate change and centering climate equity to ensure that the most vulnerable are most protected. Raleigh's emissions broadly break down into these categories: buildings and energy, how we generate the electricity we use and how we use it in our buildings; transportation and land use, how our city is designed and how we move around with it; waste, how much we throw away and how it breaks down. The Ccap plan is structured around these 3 categories and includes strategies to address how we generate and use energy, how we plan for growth, how we travel, and how we manage our waste streams. So just as much as this plan is about cutting our greenhouse gas emissions, it's also about building community resilience and fostering equity. The consequences of climate change are typically felt most strongly by those with the least responsibility for emitting greenhouse gas emissions and by those with the fewest resources to mitigate the negative effects of climate change on their daily lives. This includes our low-income communities, people living in the floodplain, people living in substandard housing, people who work outside, and in Raleigh, as in most cities and towns in the US, typically communities of color are disproportionately impacted. And also these climate change impacts are further compounded by other health, environmental, economic, and social disparities in our communities. So Ccap aims to contribute to building equity in Raleigh and addressing these climate inequities. So really quick, I just wanted to give you a brief overview of what's in the Ccap plan. Overall, it might look a little intimidating. It's about 130 pages. However, if you break it down by chapter, it's very digestible. And we might even suggest it might be perfect for a book club. So chapters 1 through 4 provide information on understanding climate, the development of the Ccap, and provide a good overview on greenhouse gas emissions, and the chapter on resilience as well as on equity. Chapters 5 through 7 are really the meat of taking action. These chapters provide actions broken into the 3 categories of buildings and energy, transportation and land use, and resilience and cross-cutting. The strategies are listed along with potential examples of actions and ideas for both the city and the community. And each section contains considerations on how to implement strategies with equity and resilience in mind. Chapter 8 is all about implementation, which is why we're here today. So before we dive into the panel discussion, I wanted to share some resources to keep everyone involved as we move forward. Please go and look at the Ccap plan and read it. It's on the website. The Ccap website also has a lot of great information, and we'll continue to update that over time. We're launching a series of webinars on Ccap to continue to inspire the community to take action and learn from the great work that others are doing. So our next Ccap webinar will focus on energy and innovation. We're partnering with Planning and Development to celebrate Building Safety Month. You can tune in on May 11th at noon for this discussion about energy use in buildings, and the details and registration can be found on the city events website. And as always, you can reach us at sustainable.raleigh email address if you have any questions or thoughts. So just to wrap this up, today is Earth Day, and it's also about inspiring climate action. Here are just a few ways you can start thinking about making some changes in your daily lives that will help Raleigh reach its climate goals. So please take a look at especially chapters 5 through 7 in the plan. The Ccap strategies are written broadly so that anyone can see themselves in the strategy, and the example actions are provided to get you started. We want all of you, whether you're a business, an individual, a homeowner, or renter, to think about individual actions you can take in your daily lives, where you work, in your neighborhood, or other organizations. Tell your friends and work together to see where you can make a change. This might include trying to get out of your car and drive less miles, or taking small changes at home or work to save energy, or planting some beautiful spring flowers for pollinators or veggies and other green spaces. Or if you're a business, please check out our Sustainable Business Toolkit that will be coming soon on our website for a lot of resources on transportation, waste, energy, and more. So other than joining our next webinar, there are a lot of other ways to get involved or volunteer. A couple of things happening now include the city hosting Earth Day litter cleanup this weekend on April 24th. So go to the city website to sign up and be a part of it. And also celebrating World Bird Migration Day this week. And it is Lights Out Raleigh. So please join the city in turning out your lights in your businesses and at your homes in order to support bird migration. And that runs from yesterday through May 12th. So those are just a couple ways that you can get back in mind. So keep checking back on the city website for more ways to get involved, as we'll keep constantly updating that as well. So with that, I'm going to introduce Michael Moore, Director of Transportation, and then we'll jump into, after each of them gives a little presentation, we'll jump into the panel discussion. So again, remember, if you've got any questions as you're listening to the panelists give a little information about what they do, please start to put your questions in the question and answer box directed to all panelists. So Michael Moore is the Director of Transportation for the City of Raleigh, starting with the city in 2018. He previously served in a similar capacity for Cincinnati, Ohio, as the Director of Transportation Engineering for 9 years, and as a city architect prior to that tenure. Prior to his work in Cincinnati, Michael worked on several award-winning architectural projects while in private practice in Ohio. He's a graduate of North Carolina State University, which he also likes to talk about, a registered architect in Ohio, and is devoted to building a walkable, resilient, and accessible Raleigh for everyone. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michael and put up his slide.
So good afternoon, everyone. And Megan, thank you for the introduction. I don't have to tell everyone today that we're at a really important point in our collective history here on this 51st Earth Day. And we all have a lot of issues and concerns we're working on in our own endeavors to address and balance issues around climate change and equity and growth and our own resilience. Raleigh and Raleigh Transportation is also working on these issues, and I appreciate Megan's invitation to share some of our efforts and how they reflect and align with the Climate Action Plan and also with Raleigh's strategic plan, where climate and equity principles are baked into the plans. Some of our actions and initiatives include supporting the community shift to alternative fuels and electric vehicles. The Go Raleigh bus fleet is substantially a CNG fleet now, and I'm happy to announce that we'll have our first 5 electric buses in the fleet delivered and soon after in the fleet by July. We're also working with Megan and her group on the EV study and working to include EV accommodations in our parking system. We're working hard to build out the Wake Transit plan and to make transit options easier and more accessible for everyone. We're working with companies to help their employees find easier options for commuting and for not commuting, as the pandemic has helped us find, via telework through our transportation demand management program. And we're not just working with companies, but we can work with groups. We've done worked with seniors at one of our senior centers to help folks learn how to ride the bus and to make it feel more comfortable for them. We are working hard to provide more and better pedestrian and micromobility options so people have choices. And I'm a huge proponent of transportation choice. And hopefully we can start to shift more trips to those modes rather than in single occupancy vehicles. And before folks ask, scooters are coming back to Raleigh next month. We're working hard to build more protected bike facilities for folks, adding more improvements for pedestrians like flashing beacons and little incremental things like leading pedestrian intervals, which is a situation where we basically add a little extra time to the pedestrian signal to help walkers get a head start across the intersection before the cars start their movement. We're working with our partners in engineering and stormwater to do more green stormwater infrastructure in our roadway projects. And lastly, we're working to build out our bus rapid transit program. Our New Bern corridor is at 60% completion and design and is funded. We've got our Western corridor, which is Western Boulevard on into Cary, accepted into project development with the Federal Transit Authority. And we've just ratified our locally preferred alternative for the Southern alignment that will extend all the way to Garner. So we're well underway with that. Bus rapid transit is going to give us a fast, accessible, and reliable travel option for folks. And recognizing the potential impacts that the project can have on the community, one of the things I'm really proud of is a parallel effort we've worked on with a number of our partners in other departments. We've had a broad interdepartmental group, and we've worked together, and not to take all the credit from Ken, who'll come later, but we've worked with them to develop an equitable development around transit plan, basically a framework for equitable and affordable and inclusive housing around those transit investments to get our growth to happen where we're going to have the most activity and to help get people into transit and out of cars. That effort was led by planning and development, and if you've not seen the work, it's really, really great document and framework for us to move forward as a community. So to close, I think it's fair to say we're not where we want to be in addressing all of the issues, but with Ccap and the strategic plan and all of our collective will, we have a really solid foundation to start making real change. And Megan, I just want to thank you for including transportation in this conversation today, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Ken. Yeah, looking forward to the discussion as well. All right, so next up is Ken Bowers. I'm working on getting the slide to advance. There we go. So Ken Bowers joined the city of Raleigh, North Carolina in 2006. Became planning director in 2015 and now leads planning with a consolidated planning and development department. Prior to joining the city of Raleigh, Ken was a consultant and principal with the firm of Phillips Price Shapiro Associates in New York City, where he prepared plans, market studies, and economic strategies for public, private, and nonprofit clients in the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut region and beyond. He has a master's in regional planning from UNC Chapel Hill and a BS in physics from NC State University. So he brings all the support to both schools that Marcel and Michael love. So with that, Ken, I'm passing it on to you.
Thanks. Put on my slide. So the Planning and Development Department is a very large department that probably touches almost every aspect of physical development that the other panelists are not in charge of. And also, although we're not in charge of transportation, we certainly are involved with transportation planning and working in coordination with folks in transportation and stormwater in furthering the city's growth and within the city of Raleigh. And at the top of the list is really the integration of transportation and land use planning. And the important thing there is that you can't support to have jobs and people living near the stops to drive ridership onto that system. And so every land use plan is at its heart also a plan for how the transportation system is going to work, and vice versa. The transportation system also helps define how land uses should be developed. And so a key strategy is to try to center more of our development in walkable mixed-use places that can be well served by transit and connected also by great pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure. And when you can get all those ingredients right, then you can get a significant shift of transportation need away from the single occupancy vehicle and into other modes. And it's a more healthy and more sustainable way to grow, to develop, and for people to get around. There's a lot of stuff going on that's either been recently adopted or is percolating in our city's development code. It's called the Unified Development Ordinance. Off-street parking is a much talked about part of what codes do, and requirements for off-street parking have basically done two things. They've created a ton of parking lots that push buildings far away from each other, making it hard and unpleasant to walk from thing to thing. And they also just made driving cheaper and easier than it otherwise would be had you left that up to the market. So like a lot of cities, we have continued to sort of ratchet down our parking standards. The council has asked us to look at potentially not having a parking ordinance in the city. And so we're going to be investigating that. Our development code has complete street profiles for any new street that's built in the development today. If it's above a certain, if it's anything other than neighborhood street is going to have bicycle facilities. They're all going to have pedestrian facilities. We're looking at general density in neighborhoods, often referred to as missing middle housing, and that's a text change that's landing in Planning Commission this month. And then I think at the heart of our UDO, which is very much a form-based code, is to trying to build pedestrian-friendly design into every new development. And so it's got a lot of tools related to that. The streetscapes are one. Frontages, which are a tool that shape how buildings relate to the public realm, are another. Michael talked about the equitable development around transit study and toolkit. What we were trying to do was take a comprehensive look at this BRT system we're building, and not just one corridor, but all of the corridors that are in the Wake County Transit Plan. And what are our development goals? We know that the city is going to grow by quite a bit. We're going to add over 100,000 people and tens of thousands of new jobs. How much of that do we want to be served by this new system? And so we posed that question to the public, and the answer we got was that it was quite a lot. Folks wanted to see us center as much of our growth as is practical around this new transit system we're building. The other side of this was equity, and it was extremely important to both preserve affordability in the neighborhoods that front along the system, as well as build new affordability, more access to employment, better facilities for people who bike and walk in these neighborhoods today, to connect them with the transit investment, to make sure it's not just a benefit to the newcomers, occupying new buildings, but is also of significant benefit. You look at a corridor like New Bern Avenue, which we've put into this image here, and you see it running through. This is I think the heaviest ridership per mile in the Go Raleigh system today. It serves a lot of folks who rely on this system. When the BRT goes in, it needs to serve them even better and make sure that they can stay where they have access to this great transit resource and are not displaced and have to move somewhere else. We have recently integrated a climate impact analysis into our rezoning staff reports. That's the example of trying to bring a climate lens to ongoing programs that we run. And then the last thing I'd like to highlight is that we're increasingly looking at adaptation, mitigation, and improving resilience in area plans. And the image on the lower left kind of pairs with an image that you showed, Megan. You showed the significant flooding that often occurs along the Crabtree Creek and around Wake Forest Road and Atlantic Avenue. This is that same area and how it might look in the future. What if we could retreat from the floodplain and in so doing, naturalize that floodplain, create a great open space resource, and then use that as a framework for new development that would be out of harm's way on the upland area, creating both economic vitality as well as a more natural environment for our waterways that gets rid of the flood risk and creates value for the city and creates opportunity. That's the kind of thing that we're trying to look at. That's an image from our Midtown plan. And I think if that is the biggest job in front of us, is to figure out how to adapt to the climate, because even with our best mitigation efforts, we're going to see change. We're seeing change today. How do we adapt to this new future and do so in a way that builds opportunity for our citizens? So thank you.
Thank you so much, Ken. That was great. And as you can see, we all work really closely together and a lot of the projects overlap. So no different here. With that, I'm going to move on to Rich Kelly. And you'll hear kind of some of that same things when he speaks. So Rich Kelly is a native of southeastern Virginia and has been a Triangle resident for over 30 years. Rich graduated from Old Dominion University in Norfolk, Virginia, with a bachelor's degree in structural engineering and a master's in environmental engineering. Rich joined the city in 2010 and has served as the Director of Engineering Services since its inception in 2016. He has been a LEED accredited professional since 2010. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Rich.
Thank you, Megan, and good afternoon, everyone. As Megan said, I'm Rich Kelly, Engineering Services Director, and it's my pleasure to be with you here on this Earth Day 2021. I did join the city back in 2010 as the city's construction projects administrator, and I can tell you that even then, Raleigh was on the leading edge of green initiatives. And I'll point out just the two facilities you see on the slide there. The one on the lower left, the Go Raleigh Operations Center, that was under construction when I came on board, and it would ultimately go on to receive LEED Platinum certification. And that basically, what LEED Platinum certification is the highest recognition for high-performing buildings awarded by the U.S. Green Building Council. The other facility, the Wilders Grove Solid Waste Services facility, came quickly on the heels of the Operations Center, and it too would go on to achieve LEED Platinum status. That project was particularly interesting in that it gave us the first opportunity to really use a fairly extensive geothermal energy system. So certainly these represent two high-profile and successful projects related to sustainability for the city of Raleigh. But I just want to reinforce the fact that every facility receives considerable thought and consideration for what's practical and feasible related to sustainability as we move forward in their development. As Engineering Services Director, I had the great privilege of working with multiple diverse divisions, all of which work to address sustainable initiatives in ways unique to their specific roles and responsibilities. You'll hear shortly from Wayne Miles, who is our Stormwater Program Manager, and he's going to tell you about the many exciting things they've got going on in their division. Our roadway design and construction division works to incorporate green infrastructure as appropriate into all new city roadway projects. They work with Michael's team there to implement sidewalks, multi-use paths, and bicycle lanes in all all in an effort to make Raleigh a more pedestrian and bicycle-friendly city. Our construction management division works to ensure that all new construction and renovations of a certain size meet or exceed the Silver LEED certification mandated by City Council. I can tell you, though, that basically the largest portfolio of Raleigh facilities is made up of our current existing buildings, not necessarily new construction. And we have two divisions that really go a long way to help encourage green efforts related to those structures. Our Integrated Facilities Services Division provides support to all departments for functions such as building controls, utilities, energy management, environmental services, security, and the like. They also participate on the city's newly created Sustainability Review Committee for new city facilities. Also, our Facilities and Operation Division manages over 2.5 million square feet of heated building space across 345 buildings, 17 parking facilities, and multiple lease spaces. Our building management professionals are incorporating smart city initiatives by using state-of-the-art software to generate and analyze data in an ongoing effort to increase our building efficiencies. They're also working to advance the city's asset management program related to existing facilities to ensure that timely maintenance and replacement of outdated and less efficient equipment and systems is taking place. Spearheading many of our department's more high-profile sustainable initiative in recent years has been our Vehicle Fleet Services Division. This division works to meet the transportation and equipment needs for the city. It's not only responsible for the repair and maintenance of vehicles, they're also responsible for procuring new equipment and managing the city's fuel operations. Currently, the division manages over 4,500 pieces of equipment, not including Michael's bus fleet, of which there are 2,000 licensed on-road vehicles. Within that group, there are 1,710 licensed eco-friendly vehicles, which include 16 electric vehicles, 222 hybrids, 419 biodiesel, 15 propane, and 4 CNG or compressed natural gas. As I said, in recent years, our Vehicle Fleet Services has worked with our partner departments to advance many significant sustainable initiatives. Just to name a few, has been the creation of the Fleet Executive Committee to review processes and procedures, many of which are oriented with and advance the city's climate energy action plan, as well as the city's fuel and fleet transformation plan. Another initiative was the creation of a Fleet Equipment Review Committee, which provides for the Office of Sustainability to be included in the equipment procurement process. They've been very proactive in the advancement of telematics and the faster fleet management software tool, which provides critical data related to tracking the usage and maintenance of city vehicles, as well as trends and uses of available alternative fuels. And more recently, really exciting development has been that the city's conducted a transportation electrification study with recommendations leading toward the ultimate electrification of the city's fleet to the greatest extent possible. However, as we move forward in this transition, we have to give consideration not only to the vehicles, but also to the necessary infrastructure, such as charging stations, as well as the personnel and facilities that will be required to maintain and repair the new EV technology. Just to throw out a tangible number, the city's efforts have reduced the fleet's greenhouse gas emissions by approximately 10% over the last 5 or so years. And this is in light of the fact that the fleet has continued to grow because, the city itself has been growing. So despite a growing fleet, we've been able to make a considerable reduction in the amount of greenhouse gas emissions. So basically, just to conclude, I just want to thank everybody for the opportunity to speak with you today on Earth Day. It's a pleasure and a privilege to work in such an environment that encourages the pursuit of sustainable initiatives in so many ways and so much of what we do. And I look forward to working with my colleagues and citizens on many green efforts going forward, and look forward to discussion and passing along information as we go forward. So Megan, I'll turn it back to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rich. As you guys can see, there's a lot of things going on within our city buildings and our fleet that we hope we can share more information as we talk in the panel that might help others in the community that are looking to do the same things. So with that, I'm going to move on to Wayne Miles, last but not least. So Wayne Miles is the City of Raleigh Stormwater Program Manager, where he has been for almost 3 years. Prior to that, he worked for a private consulting firm for 30 years, where he helped municipalities across the country implement programs to comply with the Federal Clean Water Act. He has recently improved his personal resiliency with a new hip so he can return to the hiking he really enjoys. It looks like he's on a good hike right there in his picture. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Wayne.
Great, thanks very much, Megan. And thanks to everyone for joining us today on really such a momentous day. It's great to see what Earth Day has really become, how excited people are, how much initiative and change it really is still driving even 51 years after the very first Earth Day. So many of the values, the themes, the visions of the Community Climate Action Plan are very consistent with what we are doing in stormwater every day. Just as a quick review, so our mission in the stormwater program is to manage stormwater to preserve and protect life and to support healthy natural resources and complement sustainable growth. So you see the themes are very consistent there. And our vision in moving forward to implement this vision is to be the smartest stormwater program possible to economically and equitably achieve this mission. So much of what we do, some examples, we've been working a lot on floodplain regulations and better floodplain management. Some aspects of that, what we have done and continue to do every day is help people be more educated about what the floodplain is, where flood-prone areas are in our community, what a floodplain map is, and how to find out if you live in a floodplain. So if you look at that bottom right map, these maps are online, they're available on the city's website. You can go to the mapping system, type in your address, and see where you are and where you live. And as part of our floodplain management regulations, we've really stepped up our initiative to improve awareness of our community members to where they are, where they live relative to the floodplain and flood-prone areas. We're partnering with groups like Partners for Environmental Justice, who's been doing their Raleigh Watershed Learning Network classes to help educate the community and increase awareness. As we do individual projects in neighborhoods, as we're doing right now in several flood-prone areas in Southeast Raleigh, we reach out to the neighbors, we hear their concerns, we help them understand what the risks are of where they live and what the options are for how to mitigate those risks. And in some cases, in the past, development has just been put in the wrong places. And oftentimes, because our regulations in the past weren't as strong as they are now, homes were built, buildings were built in areas that we would not have allowed that to occur now. So there's some challenges that we face and how to address those. There's not always engineering solutions. Oftentimes, the solutions are non-structural, and in some cases, it's relocation on a voluntary basis where people understand the risks and would like to relocate. We're working very hard to implement a program to do that equitably, to give them comparable housing. It's so linked integrally with our affordable housing initiative in Raleigh, because affordable housing shouldn't be flood-prone housing. It shouldn't be unsafe housing. We need to help some of our residents that do live in flood-prone areas and are vulnerable to find safer places to live. And that's a big part of what we're looking at right now. We can also make our community more resilient, though. Related to floodplain, there is a proposed ordinance change that is coming to public hearing very soon in May 4th. So everyone interested, please participate. The regulation that's proposed would restrict new development from occurring in undeveloped areas in the floodplain. So this will really help stop additional development from going in places that are flood prone and keep it out of the floodplain, with the goal of leading more toward the image as Ken showed, where we're retreating from the floodplain. We're allowing those floodplain areas to flood as they really should in a safe and managed manner, because that's what keeps flooding from getting worse downstream, and it keeps more development from being put in those flood-prone areas, which leads to more people being put in risk's way and at harm, which makes the job of our first responders, frankly, much harder, because with climate change, we know storms are getting bigger, they're coming more frequent. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when we're going to get a big storm hitting Raleigh. We came close in Florence in 2018. Raleigh at one point was right in the path of Florence. We were predicted to have between 10 and 15 inches of rain, which would have been historic. Areas of Raleigh would have flooded that have never flooded before. And so when that does happen, because at some point it will happen, we need to be ready for it. We need to be more resilient. We are working very hard on initiatives such as putting in more green stormwater infrastructure. Our current regulations control downstream peak flow or capacity or flooding impacts pretty well, but we can do more with green stormwater infrastructure to control volumes and reduce the impacts of new development. And there's some good pictures here. The bottom left is permeable pavement that allows stormwater to run through the pavement rather than just hitting pavement and running off. The bottom middle is a cistern capturing stormwater runoff from a rooftop. That stormwater can be stored. It reduces the downstream impacts, and that water can be reused for landscaping purposes and other beneficial reuse purposes. The top middle is an example of a green roof. That one in particular is at Raleigh Union Station. And green roofs are great not only from a stormwater standpoint, but from a heat island standpoint, from an impacts of overall climate change impacts standpoint. So the city is committed to leading by example in implementing sustainable development, implementing our development that reduces the impacts on stormwater. And last but certainly not least, it's leaving a community that we can be proud of leaving for our children, and educating our children on helping them create a vision what their future looks like. You know, in the top right, that the kids are so excited, they're eager for knowledge, they want to understand. We can really help do that, and any educational messages related to green stormwater infrastructure, climate change, they're eager to learn, they're eager to participate, and we can take advantage of that enthusiasm and their vision for helping them create what is their future and everyone's future. So with that, I'm glad to take other questions as they arise. Reach out to me with any comments, input, suggestions for how we can improve our stormwater program. And I very much thank you all for the opportunity to participate today.
Thank you so much, Wayne. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing here and we're going to move into the panel discussion. So panelists, if you guys all want to come on to camera. All right. Well, as you guys can see, there's a lot going on in the city, and we wanted to kick off the Ccap by sharing some of the things that the city was doing to play a leadership role, but knowing that it takes all of us really to make this climate action work happen. So with that, we're going to talk a little bit more about climate action in general. And so we've got about 15 minutes or so to chat here, and then we're going to move into the question and answers. So I'll remind everybody, if you've got any questions, feel free. I know they've been coming in. put them in the question and answer box to all panelists so we can see those coming in, and we'll answer those here in just a little bit. To get started, I'm going to go back to Michael and ask Michael, how's the city working to expand transportation access and ridership, since we know that's an important move for climate action?
Thank you, Megan. So I think fundamentally the big question that we've got with that is the expansion of our bus routes, not only in terms of kind of area, but in terms of frequency, I think is a key element in making transit more accessible to the community. This is not something that we did. This is something that the community did when they passed the Wake Transit Plan back in 2016-17. That ability to expand the hours of operation, the frequency of service, really is kind of a game changer in that people don't have to think about schedules as much as they do with the current and with the previous system. And we're not quite to frequent service on all of our routes yet, but we've been able to do that on a number of it. And it was really interesting to watch at a time when a lot of other transit systems were watching their ridership decline. Go Raleigh was actually seeing their ridership rise pre-COVID. Now, COVID has made that take a major step back, but we're starting to see a lot of our main trunk routes rebound in terms of the ridership, and we're getting back to close to where we were on those routes previously. Some of the other routes are not quite there. Some other things that we're trying to do is to make, the BRT will provide those kind of main trunk routes that'll help with commuters. We're trying to make sure that some of our routes are not only anchored by institutions and places of interest, places of job centers, but also park and ride. So in our new BRT route on Newbern, it'll actually terminate at a transit center where we'll have not only some interconnectivity with other routes, but also some opportunities for folks to commute just that far and to take the bus all the way into downtown. So trying to make service more accessible and more available, trying to make it easier to ride and more frequent, those are all big things we're doing. Second big thing we're doing is trying to make sure that people can, like a park and ride, can actually get there. So part of the planning that we're doing around BRT is looking to find where we've got missing gaps in infrastructure to make it easier for folks to get to there. So it's hard to have good bus stops when you don't have good sidewalks to get there. And looking at where we can support transit ridership by making connections back to neighborhoods with sidewalks, with bike facilities, are all things that we're working really hard on. And then lastly, I mentioned this briefly in opening comments, but we have a group, our TDM group, our Transportation Demand Management Group, and they will work with employers, they'll work with community groups to help people understand how the transit system works, to make it easier to ride. I think I mentioned that we've worked with seniors to help them understand here's how fares work, here's when the bus comes, here's how to read and understand the kind of timetables that most people look at and go, oh, I don't get it, I'll just wait for a few minutes longer. But all of those things are barriers to ridership, and where we can get with people in a one-to-one basis and reduce those barriers, we like to do that, and we try to do that as much as we can. So those are just a few examples.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, and the TDM coordinators, the Transportation Demand Management, we're working closely with them on the EV playbook. The Sustainable Business Toolkit that's going to come out here soon. And so that'll be a good one. And I think Michael set up this next question really well for Ken. Ken, can you tell us a little bit more about how the city manages sustainable growth while still trying to center equity? That's a big question.
That is a really big question. And, I oftentimes as a planner feel like someone who's been handed a hammer and told to build a house. A hammer is a really useful tool, but if I don't have someone else who's milling the lumber and getting it to the site and building the foundation, I don't have a ladder and all the other tools I need, it's going to be hard for me to make progress. And I think, we have some very powerful tools at the local level, but we need partners in the private sector and at the state and federal level to really implement those. And I'll touch on that a little bit. You know, and I would also say that a lot of the decisions we have to make in this space are going to involve some trade-offs, and those trade-offs are not always easy to figure out what is the best course of action. And I am cued in from some of the questions here that talk about, you know, on the one hand, we have very good evidence that putting more of our growth into mixed-use walkable places has a major impact on lowering transportation demand. Multi-unit buildings are more efficient from an energy standpoint. Typically, people's carbon emissions who live in those places are much lower than people who live in traditional subdivisions and rely on driving for all their transportation needs. Yet, those places are new, and they're made out of either concrete and steel or heavier wood construction. They're more expensive to build in general, and the market can't produce them and also make them affordable at the same time. So intervention is necessary to provide affordability in these places. The city has to buy land, and we have to partner with affordable housing developers to do that. The major funding source we use is from the federal level, so we need that federal support. It's the low-income housing tax credit, and we couple that with local money and with the right partners to try to produce affordability in these locations. And those are the types of tools we have, and the effectiveness of them is very much dependent on having those partners at different levels of government and in the private sector to make that happen. The climate issue is both simple and incredibly daunting. We have to drive emissions down to zero to avoid catastrophe, and we have to do that over the course of a couple decades, and we need to start right now. As you showed in your presentation, Megan, the main drivers are transportation and buildings. And we have a development code, regulates buildings. The building code, though, is adopted at the state level. We influence transportation policy, but the funding comes from the state DOT and from the Federal Highway Administration and Federal Transit Administration. So what we can do in that space is also very much dependent on what kind of funding sources we can tap at other levels of government. There's still a lot we can do, and I think a lot that we have done in terms of moving both of these things in a more sustainable direction. I think that folks have brought up the issue of flooding, and flooding is a major issue. Stormwater impacts are significant and are going to be more significant. And some of the folks looked at loss of forests in places like wooded tracts around North Hills that are being used to build pretty significantly large buildings these days. But what is the alternative to that? Our region is growing, and that growth has to go somewhere. And if it is not there, is it going to be in office parks with their vast parking lots that are actually much more impervious per capita than a high-rise office building with a parking deck is? Is it going to be in single-family housing, which is also more impervious per capita than a multi-unit apartment building that's 5 stories tall would be? I mean, much, much more. Are we going to save forests in North Hills only to cut them down on the edge of town and more pristine areas on the urban fringe? I think there's a lot of trade-offs that have to be weighed in terms of what is the right growth pattern. And, in the planning department, we're trying to weigh those all the time. Even a simple thing as bike lanes can become a flashpoint in debates about equity. On the one hand, bicycles are very affordable, a lot cheaper than a car. You can pick up a used one for $100 and ride around on it. Try doing that with an automobile. On the other hand, when bike lanes appear in a low-income neighborhood, they're often seen as a harbinger of gentrification. So, on the one hand, you're making it safer for people who may, because they don't have very much money or resources, have to rely on a bicycle to get around. And you see people like that bicycling around Raleigh all the time. On the other hand, the infrastructure that would make that safer may be seen as disrupting the fabric of the neighborhood. So, what is the right choice here? I think, this is why community engagement on these types of questions is so critical, because city staff ultimately cannot answer those questions without going to the community to really speak, to really hear what their values are, and to have them weigh those trade-offs, because there's not always a right answer staring you in the face. It's very complicated.
Thank you, Ken. Yeah, you posed a lot of really good questions about how complicated these things can be, and kind of trying to unpack the different actions that we take in the different sectors to try to work together to make something happen. So next, I'm going to ask Rich. Rich, you already talked about some of the great buildings and the kind of overarching goals that we look for our buildings and our fleet. And I know we're building our new city hall, our civic campus, we like to call it, soon. And can you just talk a little bit more about what kind of things are going into that building or other buildings that we're looking at, and how you approach kind of sustainability and climate action through when you're looking at city facilities in general? Sorry, Rich, you're on mute.
There we go. Hopefully that's better. Yeah, thanks, Megan. Glad to. I'll start out by a caveat first on the Civic Campus project, in the sense that that project's still very, very early on in development, and we're quite frankly just in the midst of evaluating what's in and what's out, and those kind of things. But I can tell you some of the challenges related to a building like that in a urban environment is basically that we're dealing with a small site with a great deal of impervious surface. So we're going to be looking at possible things like green roofs and planters and all that for trying to incorporate some sort of green infrastructure into the building. I suspect it will be most impactful when we come to looking at the building systems, making sure that they are high efficiency. We utilize as much building automation and building controls as we can to make them as efficient as possible. I'm sure we'll be looking at the lighting systems that go into the building. So basically, I think as the Civic Campus, like we do with many of our new facilities, looking at the systems and the equipment and how we can automate that and make that piece of it more efficient is usually where we get the biggest payback on what we put into sustainability efforts within our new construction. We are always challenged. We're particularly challenged with looking at so many of our existing buildings that have been around for a while. And so again, we often look to make sure that we're maintaining them and getting the replacement of systems done as efficiently as we can, bringing new systems on board that add life to existing buildings, but also make them more efficient in the process. So every project is unique. Everyone has its unique challenges. We always enjoy getting the projects that have a nice new green site to work on, that we can try many of the things that Wayne and Michael and Ken have been talking about. Those are always exciting. We also like the challenges of the projects that we have to work with existing structures and things. So each one's different. Each one creates its own challenges, but I just have to say simply, I think that we get the biggest bang for our buck in looking at the mechanical systems and the lighting systems that we put into facilities, and how we are continuing to learn to make them more efficient.
Thank you so much, Rich. That's good information for everybody that's thinking about how to do that. And good point on an urban environment, depending on where you put a building, and we have city facilities in all sorts of different places. There's lots of different questions that we ask ourselves about the use and what's around it as well. So for Wayne, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned a lot of the programs you're doing. What resilience-related initiatives has the city undertaken in the past 5 years, specifically related to flooding, that you think have really made a difference or important? You touched on some of those already.
Yeah, not to be repetitive, but to highlight, one of them is really just helping our community members be more aware. Folks may have seen the flood warning hazard signs that we have installed at a number of the most flood-prone areas where roads are known to flood on a recurring basis. And so that awareness, and when those lights are flashing, please be very aware. Don't try to drive across the flooded roads if those lights are flashing, and that can create risk. It can create dangers. So that awareness is a big part of it. We're also every year we hold flood and disaster preparedness meetings. The last year's was virtual, but we'll be doing that again in the summer, right before hurricane season starts. And that helps people understand where they are in the floodplain, if they're in flood-prone areas, how to prepare for large storm events. And then, as I said, development regulations related to floodplain management, keeping new development from occurring in the floodplain. That keeps people safer from a standpoint of not making flooding worse, as well as from keeping additional development, possible housing, and keep people out of the floodplain more. So a lot more work to be done, a lot more related to the Green Stormwater Infrastructure Initiative that will really help us be more resilient in the long run as well. And we welcome people's participation, input, and assistance in promoting our programs. There's a lot of great information on the website, and we'd love people to share your thoughts with us.
Thank you so much, Wayne. And you can see on his slide, the way that they frame up really does align really well with climate action and all the objectives we're trying to reach around equity and education, and obviously mitigation and resilience too. So that's great. So we want to have time for questions from the audience as well. I know there's quite a few in there. And I'll just say, I'd love at the end if we could all, this is about the city showing leadership. And then, so if you guys want to think about it, and hopefully we'll have some time at the end to close out and have everybody maybe share from your expertise, what you think, what are some things or the top things that you think the community can do to take climate action related to your areas or just in general. So at the end there, if you want to be thinking about that, maybe we can close out with that. But now I'm going to ask Nicole to help me look through and see what questions we're getting from the audience for the folks to answer.
Yes, we have quite a few questions. The first question is sort of for all panelists. Are there any trends as a result of the pandemic that any of the panelists see us capitalizing on moving forward to help reduce GHGs? For instance, telework, bicycling, gardening, home improvement projects, and how do they see their respective departments supporting those trends?
So I'll maybe lead off and other folks can jump in. So I think the trend that we saw mostly was it's telework, and it has had a pretty significant impact on sort of travel patterns that we've seen in the community. We were able to follow early some information and some data points that we were getting that NCDOT provided about travel volumes that they were seeing on interstates and major arterials around the state. And it was, as you can imagine, in February, March, and April, just a nosedive to very little and low traffic volumes. We've seen that come back over the last year. Raleigh and Cary still lag a little bit behind the other states in terms of those volumes per the last data that I saw. And what's also interesting is we don't have a morning rush hour like we used to. Now, some of you that come to work every day may debate that, but when we look at the pattern around the state, you see sort of a slow, gradual climb to lunchtime, and then we see things kind of pattern level out like they used to with a PM peak period. Taking advantage of that and of that opportunity to telework, I think is going to be kind of a game changer, not just for transportation, but also for how folks tend to come back and repopulate downtown. It's going to create some opportunities for us to be able to do more flexible use of the curb space and dedicate more of that to less of that to car storage and parking, and more of that to things like bikes, some outdoor dining, things like that. And it is also going to change just how we utilize parking garages going forward. Right now, our parking garages have lower utilization, of course, than they had because folks aren't back down in the downtown area and some of the other areas. It might give us an opportunity to repurpose and think about how they're used, about more flexibility in sort of shared parking passes, so folks can maybe commute to work 2 days a week, but share a pass with a friend who our colleague that works 3 days a week, and just how that plays out. So the pandemic is going to change a lot of things around that, and I think we're going to see that in long to the foreseeable future.
I think, from the from the planning side, total agreement with Michael. What the office market was very hot pre-pandemic, and there were a lot of impressive office towers on the drawing boards, and a lot of that has obviously pulled back because the demand for office space is uncertain because telework has not only proven to be reasonably effective but also very popular. And I think it's too early to tell how sticky it'll be, but it seems very likely to me that the demand for office space will be lower than it would have been had the pandemic not occurred. And so I think that's going to change the composition of our business districts, particularly our downtowns. They may be less driven by office employment. And, we've been adding a lot of residential, and it may be that we add even more residential as a result. On the residential side, I haven't seen anything in any data that indicates that people are changing their location preferences for where they want to live. A lot of people think that people move to downtown to get rid of their commute, but a lot of the people who live in downtown Raleigh commute outside of downtown for work. And they moved to downtown Raleigh because they want to be able to walk to their fun more than to be able to walk to work. And so my understanding is that leasing and sales in and around downtown is still quite strong. And that goes for North Hills and other areas. So residential market seems to have kind of plowed right along as to where it was going before this happened. But I think our cities are going to have to adapt if the office economy becomes much less of a driver for what's driving construction in downtowns, then we're going to have to adapt to that new reality. On the other hand, if you have more workers working from home who are living in downtown buildings, they might start populating the streets at lunchtime and taking up for some of the slack where the office workers are. It's still very much a moving target, in my opinion, but it is definitely something that we have to watch and look at how our land use policies impact our ability to adapt to these new ways of doing things.
Megan, just quickly from a building perspective, the pandemic's done a couple of things. We've really had to look at things that we didn't really consider in the past, such as access to the building and monitoring, folks' physical condition, that type of thing. As we go into facilities, we're having to be much more thoughtful about work environments and making sure we maintain distances and air circulations and those kind of things moving forward. So, basically being very intentional about the work environment and what the pandemic's done to that is something that we're very thoughtful of moving forward. So I think the teleworking piece too, you were talking about the Civic campus, but I think what's really happened from the pandemic is an acceleration of the teleworking process. I think we envisioned that would happen over the life of the new campus, but I think the acceleration of it has made us, to really focus on, from a technology perspective, what that means, from a work environment, what that means. So yes, it has, it's had significant ramifications not only on where we live now and where we work now, but also what we're planning for in the future. So yeah, been very impactful.
And if I could add on to that just very briefly, from a stormwater standpoint, I think some of the lessons that we've learned really are going to, in the long run, help us with community engagement. We've been forced into a situation where we couldn't meet in person, so we had to adapt. And meetings just like this one, I think, are an effective way of reaching the community efficiently with messages. Now, this isn't a replacement for in-person, and when we get back to in-person, we will do that too, but I think we will continue to stay in a virtual environment as well, because some people like it better. It's more convenient for them. They can stay at home. They don't have to worry about driving or having, keeping their kids in, especially at evening public meetings. So I think once we get back to reopening in person, we'll be able to adapt and really have the best of both worlds in terms of reaching our community more consistently and hearing them as well. I think these types of forums are wonderful and a great lesson learned from the pandemic.
Thank you, everyone. Yes, it's continued, as you guys all touched on. It's going to be continued and interesting to see how this all unfolds. Nicole, do we have another question? I know we have quite a few in there.
Oh, yeah. What are some of the biggest barriers or challenges to integrating equity into policies and programs as we start to implement the projects that are mentioned in the Ccap?
I'll just start out here really quickly and then throw it out to the group to talk about. So in the Ccap plan, I'd encourage everybody to take a look. There's a whole chapter around equity that talks about what that looks like in different ways, what the disparities might be. And then in chapters 5 through 7, as you look at the actual actions, there's considerations for resilience and equity included on each of those. And that's for us to consider as a city, but also for everybody in the community. Really, when we think about equity and resilience, we're thinking about the how we implement it. You can think of it with an equity lens and who you're leaving out or who needs to be involved in a different kind of way. And so I encourage all of us to kind of ask ourselves those questions as we're working through implementing anything we're doing in our daily lives, where we work, where we play, us as a city, as we're doing that. And it can be complex as it has been touched on today in lots of ways, but you know, the systems that we have sometimes have left people out. And so we need to think about how to do that. And I can open up to the group to see if anybody has any specific examples from the work they're doing there.
Again, I'm glad to give an example from a stormwater perspective. You know, one of the areas in the past, flood mitigation has been inequitable is many of the standards in order to look at buying out properties were based on benefit cost ratios, and the benefits were based on values of buildings, you know, a value of a home. And inherently that was inequitable because it would drive more dollars toward more expensive homes being flooded. And so in recognizing that inequity, as we are implementing our programs, it's neutral to the value of the house. It's the impacts to the house. Is that house, how frequently is that home flooding? How deep is that flooding? What are the risks to the residents and the families that are living in that home? And that's what's driving our priorities toward how to address flooding. And so, you know, I think that's an example of we need to change our traditional mindsets, especially as engineers. We need to rethink how we're setting our priorities in terms of driving dollars to mitigate flooding problems and other problems, to make sure we're doing it in an equitable way.
Megan, I'll just make a comment or two on maybe how we've been doing business in our world across our divisions, and you know, I think some of the barriers that we found, particularly for utilizing when we're talking about contractors and vendors that we utilize, that a lot of the historically the minority and underutilized businesses that we're trying to reach out to and utilize more. Quite frankly, they're often smaller and don't have the capacity that a lot of our traditional vendors and contractors do. So we've been very intentional in trying to look at opportunities to either put out smaller scopes of work or break up contracts so that we can hopefully encourage some of the vendors and contractors that haven't worked with us in the past that represent some of these minorities and other underutilized groups that we can encourage them to bid and get active in the procurement process for the city. So we're trying to be more intentional in how we represent opportunities through our procurement process.
I would just add, you know, I think that a lot of our early sustainability efforts have focused on big, expensive undertakings, like, you know, a LEED certified building is great. It's very efficient, but typically LEED buildings are major projects. You know, they're not little things. Electric cars are great, but you have to have a certain level of wealth to afford one. They're not cheap. We need to be really looking at what are small scale, inexpensive, scalable solutions that can be deployed in all sorts of different neighborhoods that will move the needle on climate. And, you know, I think a lot of things that have been talked about here, whether that is, easier access to transit, which is lower cost than vehicle ownership, or lower cost electric bicycles and bicycle infrastructure on the transportation side. How can we help existing low income homeowners with weatherization? How can we build sustainability features into our affordable housing projects? We need to be really looking at those lower cost scalable solutions and not just the big ticket glossy items.
And Megan, I want to go back and kind of amplify something that Wayne said. He said, it's a matter of sort of changing mindsets. And for us in transportation, we have a lot of partners. We have a lot of partners just beyond who we work with here at the city, but also at the state and the federal levels. And that changing mindsets, and while this is important to us and we put it front and center, getting it to be important to our partners as well, and how do we bring them along with us on this path is, I think, I feel like this one of our biggest challenges, to make it feel important to everybody. So getting some of those big institutions to change course and to sort of turn the ship is going to be, I think, remains one of our biggest challenges.
Thank you so much. And I'll just let everybody know, in the public too, we do have a relatively new Office of Equity and Inclusion that's becoming a department actually now too. And they do a lot of community outreach, and we work really closely with them and all the other departments too. So definitely check them out if you haven't. And they've helped us with designing our climate plan and thinking about how we're going to implement in an equitable way and get involved with folks. Nicole, how about we throw one more question to the group, and then I'll just tell everybody again, if you want to think of a few words in the end, it would be great to leave on a note of talking about if you have a couple things or a couple top things that you would love the community to think about what they can do to take climate action that would make a difference in the work that you do as well.
Oh, absolutely. I think there have been a number of questions about how people can get involved, just to deepen your thinking right now about how youth can be involved, how environmental educators can help amplify the plan, and how residents can be involved in decision making. There have been a number of questions also about bus stop infrastructure, benches and shelters, and how that might increase transit usage, and what the city's plans are to grow that in the future.
Yeah, I'll take that. So right in my corner. So I know everyone has probably seen the recent news reports about a very unfortunate situation over in Washington Terrace. Council has recently, about 6 or 8 months ago, helped us change our policy, working with Transit Authority and working through that, lowered the limits on the policy on where we would install shelters and stops. We used to require 25 boardings a day. It's now set at 10. And the purpose of that was so we could kind of create some prioritization. So we're not installing infrastructure like a shelter and a stop at a location where we get 2 boardings a day, when there may be a stop that has 50 or 60 boardings a day, and we're leaving folks bare in the elements on that. So it was a way to prioritize. Clearly, we see that has some deficiencies, and we are going to be working hard to make sure that we can implement shelters and benches at all of those policy compliant locations as quickly as we can. We've got money that comes from Lake Transit Plan and from our capital budget that we'll be using for that. But we're also going to retool and look and see and come back to the council about how we can start to get benches at more stops. While it may not necessarily be a barrier for ridership and accessibility for a lot of us, it definitely is for some. And if we can make sure that we can have those, you hear them often call it amenities. I like to call them facilities, just because they're as important in some cases as the bus itself for people. But to get those facilities in place, and we can make that make transit accessible for everybody. That helps people stay in their homes longer. It helps people be an active part of the community. It helps reduce the reliance on folks having to make trips back and forth check on folks, to deliver groceries, do all those things. So if we can help keep people in their homes and keep them in communities and help them be part of it, and help them stay active and vital, I think that's good for all of us, because we want everybody to be included in the community. There was a question in the chat about an adoptive shelter program. We do have that as a recent program. It is slowly, we're starting to get more interest in it. If there's anything that's a good side about the story that we had in the paper, is hopefully we'll find more folks who want to come and help us participate in that program, and we'll be able to accelerate what we're trying to get accomplished there. So.
And I'll say, does anybody else want to make any comments about engagement, how folks can get involved in the work that you're doing, or keep involved? I know Nicole mentioned there were some. I'll just say really quickly, we do have a youth climate interns program we're looking at, and quite a few programs through our Parks and Rec department that focus on youth around this too. And our climate intern program actually has partners throughout the departments working on that. We're going to continue that. So look out if there's others out there that would like to get involved. We'll have another cohort of those coming out here in the future. It's a partnership, Raleigh partnership with our department and several departments across the organization as well. But does anybody else want to mention anything about community engagement?
I'll just mention on the planning department side, we've the pandemic has caused us all to have to innovate an engagement, as Wayne said, and we've moved more and more engagement opportunities online because it was a safe way to do it. One of the first things we did was to create engagement platforms where none had existed for sort of some of the routine processes we have, such as amendments to the development code, which are called text changes, and amendments to the zoning map, which are usually initiated by a landowner petition and are called rezonings. And we now have a public input portal for both of those items, where before it ever enters the formal public process in front of the Planning Commission and the public hearing at City Council, you can read and learn about what's proposed on our input portal for both text changes and rezonings, and you can put comments on. You can ask questions. If you ask a question, you'll get an answer from staff. If you put a comment in, all of this information is bundled together and forwarded to the Planning Commission, so they're aware of what issues have been raised by the public when they begin their deliberations, and it gives them a much richer set of input before than they could get just by whoever showed up to speak at the meeting. And one of the things we're finding is that we're hearing from people and groups who typically don't show up for the public meeting, oftentimes because those meetings are in the daytime, but they are making their views known on this input portal, and so it's really broadened the base of participation we're getting. The other major engagement efforts that the planning department does, the planning and development department does, are project specific. So we're doing a study for the neighborhoods around Dix Park called the Dix Edge Study, and we have a robust engagement program for that. We have, we're launching transit-oriented development planning for the New Bern Avenue BRT corridor, and there's going to be a very robust engagement effort for that. In both of those efforts, we've actually recruited paid positions from residents of the neighborhood to serve as neighborhood ambassadors to help us reach people that have often been hard to reach from the city staff perspective. And we also do citywide planning efforts. The most recent one was the equitable development around transit. Although that was focused on the BRT corridors, it was really a whole city engagements process. We wanted to hear from everyone in Raleigh, no matter where they lived. And we expect to be doing other efforts like that in the future. One of the first is to do sort of an equity audit and overview of the city's comprehensive plan, and there'll be a citywide participation effort related to that. I don't have a start date for that effort, but it will start within a year.
Thank you so much, Ken. So I know we're getting close up on time here. I wanted to thank everybody for being here today, and just say to our panelists, if you guys have, want to share maybe one sentence of anything that you think would be a great thing for, from your perspective, for people to leave with and taking action, please share those. And again, we have our website we're going to be updating. I know we didn't get to all the questions in the panel, but it's going to give us great information to move forward with and think about what outreach we're doing as we move forward as well. And we'll share this within our partner departments as well, so they know what outreach might be helpful from their departments too. So with that, I'll ask if there's any closing words from the departments here. And thank you guys again for participating today.
I would just say one thing, which is that although there were a lot of benefits to the system we built in the 20th century, there were a lot of real problems with the way we built our cities and with the way that we built our transportation networks. We exposed a lot of people to pollution. We segregated our cities by income and race. We cut people off from participation in the labor market if they couldn't afford a reliable car. You know, we paved over vast amounts of the landscape to create parking lots, which are mostly empty most of the time. We did a lot of things that are not really that great. And I think as we look to implement this adaptation plan and to really try to mitigate, do everything we can at a local level to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions and climate change, there's an opportunity to undo a lot of these bad things and to build a better world. So the task in front of us is daunting. But on the other hand, it's also an amazing opportunity, I think, to build a better place and a better world and a better Raleigh. So I think that's what we should be focused on in all these decisions, is how can we both address the climate crisis and build a better Raleigh?
Hear, hear.
Yeah, does anybody want to follow that?
That's a tough one to follow.
That is a tough one to follow.
That.
Yeah.
I'll just say think green and stay engaged. I appreciate all the participation. Great turnout.
Megan, I'll just say sometimes issues like this are so overwhelming that, as Ken said, they're daunting, and it just seems futile to do anything. I say just find something that you're comfortable with and it's doable and do it, and then move on to another action, and don't be overwhelmed by the size of this.
And I'll just add, probably talking to the wrong group here, but, ride your bike, walk, take the bus, but even more so, get your friends to do that. Just get 2 friends to do that, and then get them to get 2 friends to do that, and we'll start to make some real change.
Wow, thank you guys. Those are great closing words. Happy Earth Day, everybody out there, and we're going to look forward to our next engagement. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon. All right.
Thanks, Megan.
Bye.
Great program. Thanks to you and your staff and your organization. Awesome.
Yes, thank you very much.